Okay. That's not right. Oh, all right. Oh, I have your bio up. All right. Oh, I see people walking in. Yeah, so this is right around when the studio begins. The grad studio's been going for about an hour, so you might have some folks coming in a little late. Okay. That's with every student coming to studio. The tour shows up a little late. So, all right. Hi, everybody. Hi. All right, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our second lecturer of our lecture series, Erin Besler. It was T. Craig Sinclair. He was the first. He did Fulbright in Norway, so he did deep ocean technology presentation. Um, yeah, all of these are very different lectures, so I'm very excited about. A little bit about Erin. Erin Besler is the co-founder of Besler and Sons, a studio that designs buildings, software, objects, exhibitions, and interiors. They were named 2019 United States Artist Fellows in Architecture and Design. Their work has been exhibited at venues internationally, including Max Center for the Art and Architecture, the Chicago Architecture Biennial, and Shenzhen and Hong Kong Bi-City Biennial of Architecture slash Urbanism as part of group exhibition now. In 2015, they were finalists for MoMA PS1's Young Architects program, and recently their work was awarded a Graham Foundation grant as part of the collaborative project Privacy's Infrastructure, which was constructed in Los Angeles in 2018. Besler and Sons have been profiled and their design work featured in the New York Times Teen Magazine, Design, Architect Magazine, Domino Magazine, and the Architects newspaper. Their work is characterized by a particular interest in construction technologies, social media, and other online platforms for producing and sharing content where digital interactions rely less on expertise and more on ubiquity. Erin received a Bachelor of Arts from Yale University and a Master's of Architecture with distinction from SciArc. Um, and prior to their own practice, Erin worked in offices such as Tigerman McCurry Architects, VOA Associates in Chicago, First Office, and Sago Architecture. Um, we're very excited to have Erin join us today. And just a quick note about our future lectures. Next Monday during college hour, Kasim Shepard will be giving his lecture. On April 10th, we have Vanessa Adisachukwi, our own, giving her fellowship lecture on climate equity. And then on the 17th of April, Susan T. Rodriguez, which is the AIA New Jersey lecture at Kane Hall at 5 p.m. But also next week is Thinking Creatively, so make sure you sign up for events, go to the speaker series, do workshops, do everything. It's going to be fun. So take it away. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Is it weird if I sit? No. I just thought it'd be more informal. But maybe there's no microphone, so I'll stand. I'll stand. Okay. So, I wanted to start out maybe by telling you a little bit more about our practice. So, I have a design practice with my partner, husband, called Besler and Sons. And he's not an architect. He was trained as a graphic designer and media designer, and he teaches web design and interaction design at Pratt. So a lot of our projects span multiple fields. We work on, like Stephanie said, exhibitions, buildings, and interiors, but also web design, and we make design software apps and things like this. And a lot of our work tries to question where design is located, or maybe more specifically why some things are considered design and some things aren't, and offer some opportunities to reimagine our systems evaluation and architecture. So as part of our practice, we work in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is walking around a city, and looking at the built environment that surrounds us and recognizing the kind of enduring ways that it takes shape. So we've tried to use that recognition to radically reimagine and expand the catalog of references currently accepted by the field of architecture. which has been quite limited. So as a form of research and as a way to move through the world, we've been documenting and amassing a collection of images of charming and compelling examples of the messy, curious, and quirky relationships between people and buildings. It's striking how much architectural discourse can feel detached, inscrutable, and unfriendly, at least striking to me. Architecture, like many other fields, has its own relatively narrow catalog of references and a pretty biased discipline. And so what we try to do in our work is pay particular attention and kind of invest time in the forms of knowledge and access to resources thought to separate the expert from the non-expert. And we try to question the value systems on which these terms are predicated. Why are some people considered experts and some people aren't? In order to insert a broader, more all-encompassing set of interests and references into the field of architecture today. So the images that I'm going to show are from a book we just published called Best Practices. And this is obviously not a house, but it could be imagined as one. It's from a Con Ed like training facility near Syracuse, New York. And it's a pretty curious sort of rescaling of what looks like a kind of icon of domesticity, like the typical kind of gable roof. But when you start to look at it in relation to the history of architecture and also art historical references, like there's an artist named Erwin Wurm that did a kind of skinny house that's been shown in galleries and probably collected for hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. It starts to have affinities with that as well. And so even though it's not necessarily considered architecture, we would like to locate it in the realm of architectural discourse and design. And so we see these images as a way to begin to reconsider issues of expertise, professionalism, power, ubiquity, defaults, communication environments, construction practices, and how these things confront architecture. Some of the things we're interested in and some of the things we've documented take liberties with size and scale as an effective means to control attention and emphasis, or look at highly functional spaces and objects that come to terms with prosaic and unexceptional gestures on the one hand, and the painstaking integration of certain finished details on the other. And how the point of a coinciding where objects in question can't occupy the same space, and resolution becomes a visual expression of their inability to come together as they gather, collect, occur, or pile up one on top of the other. Or the promise of flex spaces and meaningful adaptable architecture as another episode in an ongoing set of betrayals inflicted on our consensus imagined future by developers, industrialists, in the era of late capitalism. And also how component parts, especially low-cost ones like PVC and aluminum downspout pieces, can foster a cheery capacity for flourishes in stark contrast to the humorless sobriety of the gutter itself. In the book, there are technological adaptations that require pretty basic workarounds, recognition of the adaptability of the parking lot, which recurs. This is from actually outside the Foro Italico in Rome. This is the parking lot outside, and there's some construction going on around it, and there's just this like eye from one of the sculptures basically parked in a parking lot stall. And the sort of flexibility of parking lots is something we've been quite interested in recently as well. They're ad hoc interventions that present practical solutions to problems not as far away from the field of architecture as they might seem. This is just in the suburban area of Los Angeles, and always struck me as something that was perhaps closer to like a Venturi Scott Brown project than anything else, particularly with the antenna. This is kind of amazing. Some of the images are concerned with the stubborn impropriety of life safety equipment and communication devices. There's actually a Los Angeles Times article about a kind of fungus creeping into a suburban home and it being characterized as related to the proliferation of satellite dishes around the city, or buildings that embody the formal qualities of a free, purportedly easy to use digital modeling software. There's objects which seem rudely unaware of their presence in disrupting a scene, and building elements that attempt to portray a stark and serious tone, but instead end up offering opportunities for humor, irony, and pun. Buildings that call attention to themselves, and those that call attention to the formal expression of security, the use of architecture to regulate space, not only functionally but formally, as an ever-escalating confrontation of resources that will demand increasingly radical tactics as economic disparity and housing instability continue to increase. So while many of the images were originally circulated on social media, on an Instagram account, which we took down, we thought it important to look to another space of distribution. And so the book, which is called Best Practices, a companion to architecture and its messy relationship with building materials, signage systems, communication equipment, plant life, and people. It was supported by a Graham Foundation grant and edited by Courtney Kaufman and Christina Muschel, who's a student of mine. And there's a foreword by Sylvia Lavin and contributing texts from artists and architects. And it offers a way of thinking about neighborhoods, housing developments, streetscapes, storefronts, and interiors as places defined as much by building codes, dimensions, and geographic features as assemblages of impromptu interventions and incidental ephemera. So trying to recognize that there's ingenuity out in the world, sort of, you could call it ad hoc and you could call it what you like, but it's typically under-recognized in the field of architecture, and things like the images I showed are typically not included in the catalog of references currently accepted by the field. So through a selection of 75 images that are paired with extensive captions and citations, we try to define a territory within the margins between what's sanctioned and unsanctioned, what's regulated and unregulated, what's tasteful and tacky, and what's considered novel or nonsense. And it's organized into like 9 loose categories, each is a chapter. Austerities is the first chapter and focuses on economic demands, capital flows, and how class structures manifest in the built environment. Coincidences is about the charming juxtapositions that are created when messages and material treatments start to harmonize and rhyme. Compromise is about unfortunate outcomes of settling. Conflicts about unfortunate outcomes of not settling. Coverings about the hurried impulse to obscure, redact, and remove elements of the city, like through construction fencing or things like this. Edges about the frictions and tangible discomfort apparent in the ambiguity between one object and another. Edits is a chapter about how surprisingly fussy a quick fix can be. Fittings is about the endearing strategies of connection, and ostentations is about the self-conscious showiness that gives life and personality to otherwise prosaic or banal elements. So best practices is a term that you probably have all heard, and is one we've borrowed from sort of business or corporate jargon, but it's a term our office is particularly interested in, associated with things like this, and exploring how research, experience, knowledge, and expertise are synthesized in design practice, and the systems that exist to kind of regulate the flow of this information. So the writing that we've done for the book is relatively short form. It's sort of journalistic in tone or in nature, and it's slightly meandering as well in a kind of see and say approach. So trying to be less exclusionary in its language as well, less academic, more sort of populist in the writing. And we hope it opens up a space to propose new ways of understanding the design of everyday spaces and ubiquitous objects, and to address the more nuanced and indefinite relationships between forms of power and how they manifest. So we also attempt to address the implications and possibilities of design in the era of late capitalism amid the obfuscated workings of class, labor, markets, inequity, sovereignty, and globalization. So we've learned a lot from these ways we can shift our attention, maybe attention to things that aren't typically considered expert or even part of the field of architecture, but are just adjacent. And one such category that we've been interested in are amateur instructional videos, like the ones found on YouTube. We've been interested in how they might provide an opportunity to rethink the limits of the differentiation between amateur and expert, between producers and consumers, and the kind of inadequacy of these distinctions for contemporary models of production, at least ones that we were interested in. So this is a project that was exhibited at the Chicago Architecture Biennial, and where we were asked by the curators to make a model of a canonical interior. So that word canonical was something they gave to us. And this project is called Enjoy Your Deck, and it's an architectural model of an online how-to home improvement video of a backyard deck, constructed from paper and digital screens. And the project tries to reframe online video sharing platforms like YouTube as a contemporary category of media that circulates imagery while also generating its own set of language, media, data, and associations. Like through comment sections, view count statistics, recommendations for related viewing, pop-up advertisements, closed captions, and various options for sharing with friends and across social media. And maybe because they're more easily relatable and somehow linear than other kinds of instructional content like user manuals, it seems like these videos have become a way for individuals to find a meaningful forum to insert themselves as both producers and consumers into the discourse of designed objects and experiences. Those short narrative clips that you find on YouTube for instructional videos provide an important component of how construction and building practices manifest in media imagery, and how issues of labor, competency, and discourse are staged around the sites of production. What's kind of incredible is if you just search tutorial video or instructional video on YouTube, there's like 7 million. So it's a lot. It's a huge category. It's one of the biggest categories of video on YouTube, like next to cats or something. So through sheer volume and ease of circulation, the category of media is elevated, we argued, is elevated into the canon by presenting and prescribing the official way of doing things and offering a space in the comments for the kind of ongoing litigation of terms, methods, and best practices. So of the I have 200 million, but I don't know, 200 million tutorial videos on YouTube, a huge number for relatively small backyard decks. So we made a scale paper model of a deck and made a YouTube video documenting the construction of it, which requires just a little more than concrete, dimensional lumber, hardware, basic power tools, and a weekend. And given that almost all amateur videos are recorded in and around the home, whether it be in the kitchen or like a lot, particularly during COVID, we're in the bedroom, the den, the bathroom, they're inscribed with a uniquely domestic focus. So there's a really broad spectrum of instructional videos, from the concise and deliberate and coherent to really esoteric and bizarre instructional videos. I'm sure all of you have watched a YouTube instructional video, probably for software or how to kind of do something in your home or something you didn't need to know how to do. But the sort of range of them and the capacity for us to comprehend them points to the potential that online media platforms possess for flattening previously recognized distinctions between amateur and professional practices. So much of the content that viewers and software users encounter online today is dictated by the vagaries of search algorithms rather than other forms of defining expertise. Also PageRank algorithms, which often privilege categories such as collectively derived relevance and recently uploaded over historically favored credentials. And they begin to expand these discussions by reframing expertise as quantifiable, digestible, and communicable sets of discrete procedures, and kind of begin to put pressure on what we assume to be, in architecture at least, fundamental, like what you learn before, one thing you learn before another. There's just kind of like, I don't know, at least in North American architecture education, there seems to be a pretty like consistent buildup of knowledge as you move through history classes or as you move through studio sequences. And I think it's important to start to question or even rethink what we consider to be fundamental or like basic versus not. So alongside the YouTube video and the physical model at the biennial, we made a website with a catalog of these backyard scenes, individual tools and construction materials, and kind of recreation items where visitors of all ages can access and make paper models of their own. So you can go to our website and download PDFs of these like unfolded models and fold them back up and make an exhibition of your own. Everything from CMU blocks to trash cans and tape measures. So we're in the process of like making this into a book, which would include all these kinds of like, they're sort of like paper doll kits of backyard objects and tools, as well as like interviews and conversations with builders and people that work in their backyards, as a way to begin to expand the project outside of the, I don't know, architecture world. Alongside this sort of these questions of expertise, we've been working a lot on questioning the effects that architecture has had on the environment, which are staggering, like really, really staggering. But our hope is that by reimagining and questioning some of these things that got us here, we can produce new models and values for architecture. So more recently, I've been working with a group of students at Princeton and an organization called RARE in Philadelphia. It's a recycled artist residency located on a construction and demolition waste center in Northeast Philadelphia, called Revolution Recovery. And so we've been working on some of these issues specifically related to timber framing and the cycles of wood as a building material. It's kind of incredible how much the extent to which the processes that we impose on trees to turn them into building materials denature and abstract them. And basically turn them into, in the process of industrialization, turn them all into the same thing. It makes it easier to forget that these things come from the earth and that they're actually like not all the same. It actually makes it easier to throw them away. So many buildings in the United States are built largely from wood, residential housing in particular. It's relatively fast, the methods are well known, the literature is widely distributed. This is a kind of amazing thing to me. This was a wood frame house construction book published by the USDA Forest Service. And it's like cataloged as an agriculture handbook, which when you think about the kind of collision of these things and the the climate crisis and like the push for mass timber construction and implications of deforestation in North America, it's an interesting place for the government to have, a publication produced by the government to be advocating for the consumption of something that it's also supposed to be trying to protect in a sense. So all the books are wood frame construction books are there's so many different kinds for expert and non-expert alike. But it's all built on a kind of continuation of the narrative of extraction linked to a definition of progress from at least the early 19th century in North America. So these are some of the felled redwoods in California during the initial sort of logging push. Today, wood, or I should say trees, are among a very long list of material systems that stabilize, insulate, weatherproof, and make homes meet the standards of habitability today. And at the same time, those things that make buildings work also make them more opaque to the average person. Makes it harder for homeowners and occupants to understand, what's in their home, what it's made of. It makes it harder for them to have access to it and kind of know what to do to maintain it. So we've been working on ways to catalog houses and reimagine them as representations of some of the largest building stock as material banks, and not just as where material sort of goes to die in a sense. So reimagining them as material depots to be recirculated and used again, and trying to shift the extractive processes and conception from something stagnant or valued largely by the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, which is, something that is maybe more so driven by the real estate industry, to something more valued for its material composition, or like a material supply center for future use. So these are images of like a house that we're working on right now. And the ideas are not new and have been largely informed by conversations with an engineering firm called Erin and their work into circular design. And I guess, parallel to looking at existing building stock, we're also interested in the kind of implications that surround ideas of deconstruction rather than demolition. And if people had access, if you reconceived a wall like not necessarily as something that's just partitioning space and perhaps holding a building up, but actually storing stuff, and think of the life cycle of materials as not infinite but finite, and the fact that you need access to things to replace them if they get damaged, then perhaps you can begin to reconceive of a wall as temporary storage for building elements as well as clothes and things. And so alongside this, we've developed an app, or actually like a website, called Housemate. That's really like any other version of a smart home, It's a dashboard for your house, a kind of digital storage bank, and records the materials in your home and tries to maintain them at their highest potential use value. It tracks their status through something called a material passport, which logs the use, history, and disposition of building components, and provides tips for inspection of damaged wood, as many of the tests that are required to kind of ascertain the damage or viability of wood are either pretty visual or simply like superficial or like physical in a way, unlike steel and other kinds of materials, which require pretty high-tech analytical tools. It also provides an interface to help with assembly, maintenance, and the removal of damaged parts. Oh, and we also, I don't know, do I have access to the internet with this thing?
Yeah.
Oh, does this work? Here we go. Ooh. Here we go. So we've been working on this little also app.
I think you should drag it from the screens.
You can see it, right?
No, I think that's the slide.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, but now I can't see what I'm doing. Okay, so we've been also working on this like other part of the app that would it's still under development, but it would provide people with an opportunity to kind of think through a pile of material and reuse it to construct something that's stable, and let's see, and uses the least amount of material to make something stand up. So it's a bit pedagogical in a sense. It's a bit instructional, but also supposed to be fun. And eventually we'll have information about how much material you're using and whether or not like the thing is structurally viable. So where's your test? Oh, that one wasn't very good. Anyway, okay. Okay, so along these lines, when we were asked to put together a proposal for the Young Architects program that the Museum of Modern Art used to host, I don't know, it's like on hiatus right now. Has anybody heard of the MoMA PS1 Young Architects program? So MoMA PS1 is a museum, part of MoMA, but located in Long Island City in New York. And every summer they have a concert series called Warm Up, where each week there's a different performer, and it's huge. It's like thousands of people come. And they used to invite, and maybe one day will again, they would invite young architects to propose an installation for Warm Up. For the concert series. It would just be over the summer. Like the installation would be up outdoors for like 11 weeks in the summer. And it was, there weren't really very many requirements. It had to like provide shade, collect water, and like that's about it, I think. And maybe provide some seating. But most of the time the PS1 projects, at least historically, what we recognized was that they really were just kind of like a backdrop. They sort of sat in the background and MoMA, it just seemed like the museum was like trying to get them out of the way. Or it was like architecture was like a kind of an apology for this like huge concert series that was actually the focus. So anyway, when we were invited to prepare or propose a project for this warm-up concert series for the Young Architects program, we thought critically about the fact that many of the things that produce construction and demolition waste revolve around the idea that waste is considered to be a problem relegated to building and industry rather than architecture. It's like not conceptualized. So this project tried to reimagine waste and began with the premise that everything in architecture is already like recycled in some way, already a variation of something that's come before, and in a sense like reused. So we look at things that were built before and reuse forms, and we take ideas from things that happened 10, 20, hundreds of years ago, and we reiterate ideas and we repurpose things. And those things aren't wasted. So why in architecture have we had such a conceptual problem with physical waste, construction waste, material waste, and what can you do with it? So the project, we proposed reusing the form of the existing roof of the building and relocating it into the courtyard. So this, let me see if I can, oh, here's the mouse. Okay. Can you see the mouse? Is it? Okay. Well, that triangular thing that you see, that's the courtyard. That's where the concert series happens. And so whatever was being designed had to fit into this sort of funny shape, kind of funny truncated triangle. So we proposed reusing the roof, fitting it into the courtyard, and like bending and breaking it so that it made it fit, and then exposing the structure of it. So making visible the things that we typically don't see, the thing that holds it up, the trusses and things like that. These are just parts of it. And so, you know, the idea was that a group of people would come together on site in a kind of community event during construction, like to raise the roof, much like a barn raising. And it wouldn't just be something that like sat in the background, but would be a sort of totalizing scheme that provided shelter, and also as, you know, one of the main functions of a roof just over any building is to you know, collect water and drain it. So there was going to be an extensive system of gutters to manage water on site. And all of this information about like assembly and on-site material handling and waste procedures needed to be communicated in the field. So one way we did this was through a set of instructional videos or GIFs that demonstrated how a generic assembly of elements could occur on site. But because not all instances are the same and actually kind of difficult to fit together, we developed an app, which was a way to move the very generic condition into something more specific and to account for things that deviated from standardization. So it seemed to us that most waste produced during construction happens as the result of either excessive, like over ordering, or offcuts that are no longer standard lengths or dimensions, and contractors, it's easier for them to take a new piece than to reuse it. So this app was going to be a kind of supposed to be a material management system to recirculate offcut pieces into the project in a kind of zero waste approach. Oops, backwards. Okay, so there were like details to track the reuse of materials and assembly of things, and this idea of making fit. I mean, when something is not fit for use, it's categorized as waste. So the whole idea was to reconceive of objects as not even entering into the category of waste by recirculating them on site. And we extended this idea of like fitness through the rest of the project as well, and proposed like a summer, MoMA had their summer concert series, and we proposed a summer sort of physical fitness series to make people fit as well. And they really just did not like us suggesting programming for that conflicted with their concert series. Anyway, so there was like a dance deck or fitness deck that would host different kinds of programming, from CrossFit to yoga to spinning. And so, I mean, the reason why I showed this project is just as a way to begin to, I would say, like open up a conversation about how what seem like really practical problems can be pushed through an entire project and inform conceptual decisions as well. Maybe ones that clients don't entirely like, but you know, you sort of kind of have to try. This is maybe the last project I'll show, and this project has been through like a lot of versions or iterations. It was first shown in Los Angeles at the Mack Center for Art and Architecture, and then at the 2015 Chicago Architecture Biennial, and then at the University of Technology Sydney Art Gallery. And each time it moved to a different place, it like sort of snowballed and gained other aspects of it. But this kind of concern with systems of circulation, distribution, and regulation, and access to information informs a lot of our projects, in particular this one, from large-scale home improvement centers to local hardware stores that kind of cater to and support the maintenance of local communities, and the availability of many consumer-oriented building materials that often stand in really stark contrast to some of the dominant narratives that try to distinguish architecture from building. And so the entire situation was a kind of participatory exhibition and installation, and looked at everyday aspects of construction and things that have been relegated to practice, like building information modeling and studs, and tried to, again, take something really practical and push it through something conceptual, a sort of conceptual design framework. So each version of the project deals with the kind of problems that arise when you move from across platforms, like from 3D modeling software to BIM, and then through large systems of materials distribution and circulation to a piece of construction. In this case, a series of freestanding rooms. So there were 3 rooms that were kind of like little squiggles in a gallery. And what we did was we tried to design something in Revit and then build it, like literally, and not erase or mute any of the aberrations that are produced by the software. As a way, one, because we thought it was beautiful and interesting, but also because it was a kind of a way to look critically at this software platform that the sort of field of architecture, the practice of architecture has, or even the industry that surrounds it, has purported as being something that facilitates like communication and like makes things easier, or resolves like helps to resolve collisions, and we just saw it as something that had a lot of trouble resolving those things, and so we wanted to build those like irresolutions. So moving between these kinds of platforms, or let's say like different ways of ascribing value to things, causes aberrations. And in this project, it was all sort of registered through the appearance and disappearance of details and corners and at seams. So like really just letting the molding do kind of whatever the software said it was going to do, and not erase those kinds of things. And also register the fact that the front side of the wall and the back side of the wall are very different, like just like kind of ontologically, like very different surfaces. So we're in architecture really concerned with fronts. We pay a lot of attention to them. We finish them, we detail them in really specific ways. We inspect them in really specific ways, and usually backsides, or like the things we don't see, like framing, is relegated to the realm of building. And so this project tried to kind of recuperate some of that space and expose it. And you know, I'm sure you can tell there's too many studs. There's like more studs than you need to hold these walls up. But we were interested in the studs doing a different kind of work. That it was more like measuring and marking the form than just something structural. Like I said, like something a bit more conceptual. And also, you know, we thought that we were going to save a lot of money. We were like, to the contractor, you only have to finish one side of the wall. So we thought it was going to cost like half as much as if you did both sides. But as it turns out, when you ask the contractor to like pay attention to the studs, and they have to be perfectly straight, and they all have to be clean, and you treat a stud like an art object, it actually costs more. So anyway, and we also asked them to not do what rule of thumb dictated. So studs come with like manufacturer instructions about spacing. The drywall comes with manufacturer instructions or data sheets about how tight curvature can be, and we asked them to work outside of those or push those limitations. So radiuses were tighter, there were more studs than needed, and we were really trying to call attention to things that aren't typically looked at or cared about. One of the really interesting things that emerged from the project, and you know, it's always interesting when you look back on something, or you're in the middle of something and you realize you're doing something that you didn't plan on doing, or you produced something as part of the design that you didn't realize was designed to begin with. So the gallery that this project was at told us we couldn't secure anything to the floor. Like we had to protect the floor. It was a really precious floor. They didn't want it damaged. So we designed and made these like plywood bases that sat perfectly under the rooms. And initially we just thought of them like that, almost like a coaster. for the room. But what ended up happening was the contractor, once we had those in place, the contractor was like, we don't need your drawing set. We'll just trace the we call it template. We'll just trace the template or trace the coaster, and then you'll have your room. So it began to be a different sort of a different surface for communication than the typical drawing set, and really forced us to question, like, what do architects produce? What are the drawings that we're producing communicating? And are there other ways of communicating things either in the field or to another audience that we don't do right now? And so because this project was on a certain level, like, pretty inward looking, looking at the field, looking at practice, trying to communicate to people that are architects or contractors. When we were invited to the Chicago Architecture Biennial and they wanted to show this project, we pushed for another form of the project. And so because it was going to be a more public event, because the Chicago Architecture Biennial was hosted at, and still is, at the Chicago Cultural Center, which is in downtown Chicago. It used to be the Chicago Public Library, but it's a huge public building. It takes up like an entire city block downtown Chicago, right across from Millennium Park, and is open to the public, so anybody could wander in, even people that didn't know they were wandering into an architecture biennial. And so we made an app called Stud Finder. That's a really limited BIM-like software program where anybody could squiggle on a screen and produce one of these stud wall rooms. In effect, turn anybody into a kind of designer or contributor to the project. So it shifted attention and our design focus away from a kind of single special object to a system, or like an interactive system. So this project, like a lot of our projects, questions the rigidity or kind of territory around architectural design. What's considered architecture, what's not, who's considered a designer and who's not, and who gets to decide what anybody works on, or what they don't. So we see like digital tools today as a pretty ubiquitous space to kind of work within, and the question seems to no longer just be, at least for me, like how interesting or resolved of a thing you can make, but where does it end and what's the separation between, or why is there so much of a separation between like producers and consumers? So as part of the app, you could also, you could squiggle and make your own, and then you could submit it. There's a little green button in the bottom. You could still go to studfinder.org and do this yourself and contribute to the project. But you could submit your design and it would go into the collective. So you can see that it's basically taking every squiggle, even if it's like a pile of spaghetti or Bart Simpson's face, and bringing it back to 4 walls, because that's how we defined a room. Even if it's what looks like a straight line, it still produces 4 segments. If you submit it, it adds to the kind of collective design and is averaging everybody's design together. And you could also download a plan of the room that you designed. And so this is a really small sample of what we were calling the drawing set. Actually, on your left is an image of how it was installed in Sydney. It was on small tablets that were hooked up to a printer, and you could print out what we called the plan on that 8.5 by 11 printer. And on the right is what we were calling a drawing set, which isn't a typical drawing set. It was a drawing set for people that don't know how to read a plan or don't know how to scale something. And so it was a drawing set you could print out at full scale and tile. Like, you could print out these 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and tile them on your floor and make a template of your own. And also along with that came a series of construction animations, GIFs, instructional videos for how to do various things in building a room or building a wall, from stud framing and drywall hanging to joint taping and screw hole mudding and things like this. Maybe I'll just stop there. Well, I was going to say it's pretty hard, after the project, I go back and now think about just how much drywall got put up and then torn down in the course of a few months on various continents. And it's really hard not to be concerned with and increasingly aware of the kind of environmental consequences of our projects, particularly those that have relatively short lifespans, which they do in like early career young practices that are mostly working in the realm of exhibition and installation. Um, so I hope you all consider like where your materials are coming from and where they're going. And also the people that surround those sites of extraction and the sites of then like I don't know, dumping. That's it. Sorry to end on like a down note. Yeah. Yeah. The constraints of construction materials. Yeah, the transportation. I mean, we've done a little bit, but it's really hard to quantify that because oftentimes transportation is only the only way that the industry right now understands like the provenance of material is from the manufacturer. So that information is pretty readily available. Like you know what warehouse it came from or what but when you think about transportation, I think you also have to think about like the hole in the ground that it came from, like the silica came from, or there's actually this really great essay or description of a project Andres Hake did a performance called Being Silica like a year or two ago, and he wrote a sort of project description and published it in Metropolis, where he talks about how all the silica being used in the high rises in New York, like the ultra clear glass, is being mined just outside of it's being mined in Illinois, and then also being used just outside of Philadelphia to cap fracking sites. And so he makes this sort of like triangulated connection between like the ultra clear glass and high rise buildings in New York, the communities in Philadelphia that are, you know, subject to the fracking sites, and then the communities in Illinois that are subject to these like huge sites of extraction. And it's a great essay. It's pretty short. You should all look it up. But anyway, so I think in terms of transportation, we haven't done enough. I think, you know, like we haven't been able to go beyond the manufacturer to know like what quarry it came from, like all these different components that make up the thing. And there's so much. I just feel like there's so much like to make architects kind of feel a little bit better about that. Like there's a lead credit for like local, right, within 500 miles. But that also doesn't take into account, I don't know, like if you bought your Carrara marble from like some supply center that's 100 miles away, you still get the lead credit, even though it comes from like Italy and is not, yeah. Transportation's a really interesting thing though. And I don't, and so big, right? Like so big. Yeah. Yeah. They were. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, probably. I mean, the for sure. And even no, it's a great question, and even that's a great point actually, and even especially because, and I hadn't thought about it, um, the fact that like social media is a much more accessible space than like our very small print run book that's like only available at like architecture stores or on like Amazon, which is horrible, and contributing to all this as well. So no, we haven't, but we should, and we will now. Yeah. Maybe put the account back up. Yeah. I think that pretty much everything is. I don't think that the architects around me would agree. You know, I think a lot of architects, particularly those in academia, unfortunately, maybe not here, but others that I know, have a pretty narrow definition of what is and isn't architecture, or want to know how something is. You know, how is that architecture? Even like there's a Nicholas Pevsner quote that's in that Banham Black Box essay that's like, Lincoln Cathedral is architecture and a bicycle shed is just a building. Or what we teach in school is architecture, and like what happens in the world is practice or build. Like there's maybe in other countries there's not such a clear divide, but I feel like the way that we have this kind of education, that North American architecture education being so much, in many ways, built around like architecture as an idea. If there isn't an idea, if it's seen as just utilitarian, then it's not. Most architects wouldn't consider it architecture, or wouldn't think that there's, maybe that's too big of a way of saying it. Wouldn't think that there's anything that can be learned from it, maybe. Yeah. There's just different models. I don't know if they're better. I mean, yeah. I don't have a good answer, but like for sure, the education in Spain is much different. Switzerland too. They do, but when you go, I mean, I think about all the architects that I know practicing today that were educated, like Andres, who's now the Dean of Columbia and did this Being Silica project and was educated in Spain. And their class sizes are huge, and you come out and you're like one of 1,000 people graduating from like Ibero-America. You know, it's a much different model, and they have a really specific idea about what architecture is, but somehow there's more room in that, I think, for, I don't know, there's more room to push back maybe, or more room for people. Yeah, I find that a lot more often than not, I'm encountered with more limiting definitions of architecture in North America. And having been in academia for a little while, I have seen that like what we teach in core is pretty it's pretty like there's a consensus around like what's worthy of being studied and what's not. And maybe not by everyone, but I think that, you know, like we have a survey class that looks at, it's like a survey class, and all that is looked at is 20th century buildings by European architects and sauna. Yeah. For sure. I think everything that a lot of the things they were trying to do is to make, you know, to look at the everyday and to conceptualize it. And even the way, there's actually this amazing introduction to MIT republished Learning from Las Vegas in its like original format, like the really big thing. And there's a new intro that Denise Scott Brown wrote. And she writes about how much she hated the format of it. It was designed by Muriel Cooper, and like she hated the format of it, and the intro is called The Tyranny of the Template because it didn't allow for any flexibility, and she really wanted the small pocket-sized thing that people could take around. The one that probably a lot of people have, the soft cover, light blue one, that one that's more, you could throw in your backpack and it's for everyone, and you don't need to lug this thing around and have a desk and a bookshelf and have a hardcover thing and spend like $100 on it. It could be like a 12. So those things are for sure, you know, more in line with the way that I think, and the book is like indebted to complexity and contradiction in a lot of ways. And also learning from Las Vegas. Yeah. Great, thank you.
I don't know.
I definitely did. Yeah, thank you.
Really great.
Excuse me?
Thank you so much.
David.
He's our dean.
Oh, you're the dean.
Sorry. He's also you're a Princeton alum, right?
I don't want to admit it, but
We're in the Sweet 16. Did we just win or something? Did we win the next round?